guys, welcome back. On this week's episode of Bone Apple Tea, we sit down and talk to our good buddy, Andrew Caudill. He is the head trainer and I guess owner of Paradigm Performance. So definitely check him out. He plugs all of his stuff at the end. I think paradigmperformancept.com is his website. But we talk about mobility in this episode. Pretty much like, what is it? Who is it for? Is it just for somebody who specifically wants to become more mobile, or like, is it the same thing as flexibility? What kind of drills would you go through? What's the most useful tool if you were to get something for mobility training? You'd be surprised by that answer.
Mm-hmm.
And basically that's what the whole episode is about. As we go through mobility, he goes through things he likes to do with his clients and what it actually is, and what would it actually do for you.
Yeah, we actually get to talk about our own like little personal stories too, which is actually nice because Andrew's actually been able to help us out directly. So
for sure. And then we discuss also the importance of getting a personal trainer and what they can actually do for you and how it can accelerate whatever your goals are in the gym. Just having somebody on hand you can ask questions to or ask questions of, and then also help you with programming, give you a better baseline than where you would start, not knowing anything. So it's a really cool episode. We sit down. It's about an hour long. And enjoy.
All right, cool. Sweet. Well, welcome back, man. It's good to have you on. Gosh, dude, last time we had you on, it was like, February when we actually talked about, I think Paradigm Performance was brand new back then, right?
Yeah, I think I was just like starting up or Paradigm Performance was like an idea back then. I was just starting it up, but now it's like a for real thing. It's pretty sweet. I'm pretty legit now. I got the shirt and everything. So.
It's a way of life,
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, because I was in the old studio.
I know.
The old house.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Crazy. And now we're over Zoom.
Yeah. So actually, do you want to take us through kind of like for those that like don't really know what's been going on, you want to take us through like what you've been up to as far as like what Paradigm Performance is, where you've taken it and all that?
Sure, yeah. So, I guess I started Paradigm Performance in my living room. That's where I kind of had the idea to do so. And then basically just kept on grinding, dude. Like all it has really changed for me is that I'm just a lot more involved online on social media. I've been starting to write some new blogs. I've been writing a little bit more content, and that's kind of what it turned into, other than just like making the switch to training people at home and making the switch to training people via Zoom instead of in person at a gym. Other than that, dude, the principles have stayed the same. I still do the same thing. I still like what I do. It's just a little bit more effort on my side, but that's okay.
I think you got, and like since the last time we had you on, now you have your website's up, and then also like I think you did an FRC in between like last time and this time, right? Is FRC, because that was more recent. Like
yeah. So last time I saw you guys, since the last time I saw you guys, I actually did 2 of them. So I did an FRA, and I'm working on getting my Kinstretch certification right now. So that's actually mobility Kinstretch classes in the works as we speak.
Okay. Yeah, and so it's actually kind of good that you bring that up, because the topic I wanted to talk to you about, because I feel like this has almost become your specialty here, is mobility. So for those that don't even know what mobility is, you want to kind of run them through like mobility and like why even consider doing it?
Yeah. So I think people have this idea of what mobility is, and that's being able to like move your body in every which way, like all crazy, super flexible. And I think that's what they think of when they think of mobility, like a super flexible person. But there's a big, big difference between flexibility and mobility. Just because you're flexible doesn't mean you're mobile. Anybody can shove themselves into a split over time. But can you actively lower yourself into that split? That is the disconnect. It's about being able to control the body moving into any which way. So it mitigates injury, and it really just prepares you for the outside world. And you always, always, always regret training in the position that you get hurt in. So that's one of the reasons why I do it. It's just I like calling it bulletproofing. Make yourself bulletproof. Harder to kill,
right.
in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's actually, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like I feel like a lot of people see somebody who's flexible and is like, oh yeah, that's cool. They're probably, I guess less prone to injury. When in fact, sometimes it's the exact opposite. Somebody who's like hyper flexible can have a lot of problems because they get into something like that, like heavily loaded, and then they can't actually, do anything with it. So they're just directly loading their joints or, their skeletal system instead of their muscles themselves.
Right. There's no, stability behind it. There's no strength behind it. And that's really where I think like a method like FRC or kin stretch comes in handy, because it teaches you how to strengthen those joints and it strengthens those range of motions. So I was just telling Randy about this not too long ago, is that when you go into a squat, it's not about letting the weight push you down into a deep squat. It's about lowering that weight down with you into a deep squat. And that's where I think paying attention to your mobility and taking care of things like that on a daily basis really have carryover over long periods of time. Mobility is not just flopping around on a foam roller for 5-10 minutes. It's really like taking strength training principles and putting it into a very specific movement. And I think that has a ton of benefit carrying over, and not into only lifting weights, but like just moving about in life. I noticed one of the things that I noticed the most is when I go for hikes. I feel much more confident in like my footing, and I feel like my ankle's not going to give out on me at any second, and I feel like I'm actually feeling the ground when I move, and I'm not just like moving on the ground, if that makes sense.
So like, yeah. And like, no, I 100% like agree. I know you feel completely different after doing like a mobility work session, especially before lifting, you know what I mean? Especially like, I don't know, for me personally, like ankles and knees, I just feel like a lot more control of like my feet and whatnot. And I feel like I can feel the ground a lot more, you feel a lot more stable. But for somebody who's like, I don't know, meathead bodybuilder type guy, and probably thinks that mobility work is just for old people, and like if you don't have pain, then like you shouldn't be doing it or something like to that effect. Like, I guess, how would you explain to them how mobility would benefit somebody in that situation who's just solely focused on building muscle, like visibly, right? Like a bodybuilder who's just like, all right, I want to get huge. I don't really give a shit about doing this.
Well, I would probably explain to them how priming the body and doing mobility can help complete that goal that they have. If their goal is to, let's say, increase their squat, they're like, yeah, man, I'm trying to get like the heaviest, most badass fucking squat ever. But their knees are shit and their hips are shit. I'm going to be like, okay, well, your hip A doesn't work like a hip. So how are you going to get your hip to do hip shit when it doesn't really do hip shit? So I try to explain to them like, okay, so when I make your hip do hip shit, this is how it carries over into your squat. So doing things like mobility, if you're plateauing because of like, oh, my fucking back hurts when I'm squatting, or, like my knee hurts after I'm done squatting, there's ways around that. There's ways that you can take care of that. And because that shouldn't be the limiting factor of your squat. Mm-hmm. If you want to get better at squatting, you should take care of the things that are like stopping you or holding you back. And that's one of those things.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because there's actually, I see it all the time at the gym, as someone will say, I have really bad knees, so I wear knee wraps. Do you think that that's problematic, that it's almost like putting a Band-Aid on it?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, 1,000%. That's like putting that thing in a crutch. It's like, it's literally wrapping up the problem.
Yeah, like
that's not okay.
Like literally wrapping up the problem.
That's when I would say, take a step back, take a look at the problem. Your knees fucking hurt when you're squatting. There's something up. Yeah. That wrap is theoretically acting as a muscle. pretty much extra muscle around that knee. Now imagine if you actually trained the muscle around the knee capsule itself. The need for a wrap, you would have, and it's one thing if you're squatting like 600 pounds. I guess you need some like support when it comes to that. But if you're squatting 200-300 pounds with wraps, you're taking the wrong approach to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not about how much weight you can lift. It's about how much weight you can lift comfortably.
Yeah.
If you can't comfortably lift that weight and push yourself to an extent safely, you shouldn't be lifting that fucking weight.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny.
Sorry for swearing so much too. It's bad.
It's kind of funny too, because, a lot of people don't really understand that, if you improve your mobility and you get full range of motion, your ceiling for a muscle building potential is now higher, because you can actually get a better, stretch response out of a muscle.
Right.
Somebody trying to build their pecs or something, and they're like, what the hell? My, upper chest looks flat as hell, and my front delts are gigantic. It's like probably because you have some serious problems going on, and the pressing you think you're doing for your upper chest is completely hitting the wrong muscle, and eventually you're going to plateau because you're going to start getting shoulder impingement or pains and stuff like that. And I mean, personally, like that's when I first started doing mobility stuff, was for that reason. I was like, okay, my shoulders hurt, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm going to lay off the benching for a little. And it took me like 3 or 4 years. And I'm obviously like still have a ton of work to go now, but the amount of chest development in the past like year has been substantial, just because of like the amount of work that I did to correct that, which is insane, because a lot of people like don't realize like they're just cranking something in the complete wrong way.
Exactly. And I think, touching on one of the things that you said about, training in a certain range of motion, is when you train in a specific range of motion, your body gets strong in that range of motion. So like for the people who are going to probably see this video and argue about, like only squat to fucking parallel with the floor, what happens when you're athlete or something other than that, or you're, what happens when they're put in a position lower than neutral with the floor?
Yeah.
Or what happens if they're put in a position where their knee travels past their toes? Are you going to risk that injury, or are you going to prepare them for that? Are you going to do what's necessary to help mitigate injury at whatever situation is going to happen? So you always regret the position that you do not train in. So, I mean, that's what I have to say to that. If you got someone who like can squat fucking 700 pounds, but they can only get to 90 degrees in their squat, that's okay. But watch what happens to the same person if they go 2 or 3 inches below 90 degrees. It changes the whole playing field for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think people underestimate, like, I remember seeing this post, like, oh, like, what's the difference between 7 inches in your squat? And I was like, that's a lot, actually.
Yeah, that's pretty substantial.
That's
a huge
yeah, like, I was like, I don't know. Like, I mean, because, like, I think people forget that, like work is literally an equation, which is force times distance, right? So if you can take a lighter weight and lower it further, you've actually done more work on the muscle than taking more weight and doing a shorter range of motion.
Yeah,
and especially depending on the intensity that you put behind it. You could just like sloppily do a rep, just like bounce off the floor and shit, or you can contract what's necessary, the entire body, let's say, and really feel every inch of that rep.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
That's another way you could do it too, to strengthen every bit of range that you physically have.
That's the thing too, is like I feel like a lot of people kind of forget, like, all right, well, what's like the intention behind this exercise? Like, why am I even doing this? Like, the point is I'm trying to build X, right? So like, why I'm not just doing it to do it, right? It's not like, all right, well, I moved it from point A to point B, now my legs are bigger. It's like, well, no. I mean, what are you trying to target? Because you need to be using that. And if you're not consciously thinking about it until you get to a point where it just happens, it's not going to just happen. And I mean, even if you're somebody who like squats, like if you're going to be a guy who squats to 90 degrees, like that's totally fine, right? Not everybody has to go ass to grass, but like having at least a day a week or something where you do at least like a body weight set of ass to grass, just so that you can sit in it to feel what it's like, you know what I mean? Just so you don't lose it. Because a lot of these things, like, you just, over time, you get older and you don't realize like, oh, I can't do that anymore, until one day you try to do it and you're like, holy crap, I like ruined something in my back or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like something silly. Like I think one thing we kind of mentioned.
And over time,
oh, go ahead.
Over time, if if you don't use a range of motion, your body quite literally just like forgets about it.
Yeah.
You know, like try to do some shit behind you back in this range of motion and see what kind of time that you have. It's not going to be fun. It's probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable compared to doing something right out in front of you, what you're used to doing every single day. The reason why you can't do anything over here anymore is because your body just doesn't do anything in that range of motion. You never use it. So you're not going to be good at doing stuff over here until you continually use it. That's the thing. You know, like if you don't use the range, you're going to lose it, but you can still kind of get it back. You can still kind of train what you have and make it better.
So actually, I have a question that's about, like, I guess mobility work in general as related to diet. So like, because I feel like some people might be a little confused. So like, if you're doing mobility routines, like specifically, right, and you're trying to just fix a range of motion and whatnot and strengthen it, is this something like you would recommend somebody be in a calorie surplus for? Because, you know, there's a difference obviously between like muscle building, strength training, and then like a neuromuscular adaptation, which, well, I feel like a lot of the time, right, like mobility stuff, as I understand it, is largely neuromuscular. You do have a strength component to it because you are involving a muscle, say, you don't use regularly. But do you think somebody who is trying to like specifically focus on mobility should think, all right, maybe I should be at maintenance or higher and not really in a deficit?
I hate giving this answer, but I think it really does depend on the person.
Yeah.
You know, like if someone's goal was to get, you know, if someone, for example, works a desk job, right, and they don't really move throughout the day, and they're working at their desk all day, and the most that they get up is to go to lunch or go to the bathroom, and then they come home, and then, you know, they don't have access to the gym because it's COVID or whatever. Do I think that they need to eat in a calorie surplus? Probably not. They're not really using a ton of it. You know, if they were going to the gym and they were hitting it like 3-4 times a week, and their off days they did some mobility, and their job was a little bit more active where they got up and walked throughout the day, maybe. And that's like a strong maybe. But I think someone who is just trying to get into mobility is the general population. I think they should focus on eating what their body needs to support healthy function. So like not 1,200 calories. So like something that's more like supporting building muscle, and doing mobility with intent, probably 3 to 4 times a week, depending on the person. You know, some people might need it more, some people might need it less. Some people are going to do it with strength training. But if we're just talking about just mobility training and the very bare basics of nutrition, maintenance calories, if not a deficit, if their goal is like to just maintain or lose weight, and hitting their mobility with intent. You know, it's not about hitting it super, super hard, but it's hitting it with the right intent, feeling the muscle, feeling the stretch, putting the right force behind it. That's what it's about. So are you going to burn a ton of calories doing it? No. Will you burn some? Yeah. But it really depends on the person.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because like it's good, because I like the way you phrase that, because, you know, it's really hard to give kind of advice to general people because everyone has like different requirements and stuff. But I'm about to make you do that same thing again, because I'm curious when it comes to these mobility sessions. I mean, you've been training me and it's been wonderful. What's some like common problems that you've been, I don't know if problems is the right word, but, you know, common tightnesses and common issues with people that you've been doing this sort of FRC training with?
The most common is probably the hip and shoulder. Definitely. Because you think about what people do on a daily basis. And I always think to driving, because if you're anything like me, you probably drive quite a bit. And whenever I'm driving, my hips are right in front of me. My arms are right in front of me. And that's the position that I stay in. So when I go into any other position, that makes it a little bit tougher. And a lot of people go to go to work and they'll sit on a computer, or they'll, maybe they're a chef. They work with their hands right in front of them. Maybe they're an engineer. They work on stuff right in front of them. So through the course of the day, you're not really getting in a lot of motion throughout here. Right?
Right.
Now, that's a different type of shoulder compared to someone who works like a construction job. Their hips and shoulders are different, but there's still issues with them. I might see construction workers have issues with hip extension and shoulder external rotation because they're used to banging a nail or something, or they're used to just getting on one knee to go grab something. They're never in hip extension, or they're never super back in external rotation. So again, it depends on the person, but everybody is like kind of falls into a pool of either shitty shoulders or shitty hips or both.
Yeah, myself included.
It makes a lot of sense just from like all the sitting and then like you said, right? Like desk job work. I'm sure like desk jobs are probably the more common job nowadays. And, a lot of like there's a reason why the mobility space and all that kind of stuff and like wellness seems to be kind of booming as of the past like 5 years or so. And it's probably a lot to do with people just being in a lot of pain because, like doing basic stuff like, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people have forward shoulder, right? And like upper cross and lower cross are probably some of the more common, syndromes people have nowadays simply because like they sit down all the time. I mean, you can even tell if you drive your car for like a 3-4 hour drive, you get up and you're like, holy crap, you can't really stand up all the way and you're like shaking your legs out and stuff. And, think about people don't really realize, well, I'm doing the same thing just in my desk for 8 hours a day. I don't even think about it,
Yeah. Yeah. And I was actually curious when it comes to.
And they try to counter that with like an hour of exercise.
Yes. Yep. And,
what were you saying?
And an hour of exercise. And like, so for someone who's like, oh, I don't need to do mobility, I roll out my IT band with a roller and I roll out my body with the roller. Isn't that enough? What do you say to that?
No, it's not enough. That's what I said.
Next question.
Why is it not enough? Now, typically when you go, next question. Now, typically when you go into like SMR, right? You'll do SMR and you'll feel awesome, right? But it's temporary. SMR only lasts so long, and SMR just stands for semi-myofascial release, I think, right?
Self, I think.
So when you roll it out, it's temporary and it only lasts like 10, 12, 15 minutes at most. So if you don't use that in its new lengthened state, your body's like, all right, dude, well, thanks for that. I'm going to go right back to the way that I was because you didn't really do anything with the thing that you just spent 15 minutes rolling me like pizza dough, hurting yourself. Basically, with a foam roller. So that's why I don't think it's necessary. Now, if they took that, right, and they matched it with something that actually locked in that range of motion, let's say if they're doing their IT band and they, sat in a very deep squat and like they really tried to focus on their form, keep their chest upright, spread the knees out and like really try to lock themselves into a deep squat, then I'd say that's pretty beneficial. But you would have to follow something like SMR with something that locked in that new range of motion. Otherwise, your body's going to rebel.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, because that's like what you're describing is like me circa like ever. Like I always would just like I would always just foam roll and be like, all right, all done, so and it didn't really, a lot of it didn't really change until like honestly kind of recently, because I didn't know what to do. And so that's why like when you took me through all that stuff and gave me a program, it literally like, what, one thing I wanted to mention is that one thing I've noticed about doing the mobility work that you've prescribed for me is that I don't spend as much time, or if any, stretching at home because I feel like I'm putting so much work at the gym. Like my back isn't stiff anymore. My shoulders aren't like super tight. And I definitely feel that difference when just on a day-to-day basis, like waking up in the morning.
Right. And the intent behind it is really where you get that bang for your buck. You know, like when you just like foam roll for 10 minutes and that goes back to its pre-stretch state, you're not getting any really return on your investment, right? You put in the time and the energy during your stretches, and that buys you a lot of time of like, oh, you know, my back feels like shit. I got to go lay on my foam roll for 10 minutes while I watch TV. Rather, you could just hang out and watch TV.
Yeah. Right.
So it sounds like
you just said something that go ahead, Rick.
Okay, so I was just gonna say, like, so it sounds like, you know, if you're gonna do SMR stuff, you definitely want to go into like whatever your intent is, right? Like, okay, my IT band is tight and it's preventing me from squatting properly or something to that effect. So you roll out your IT band and then you squat, or you try to get into a squat. And the idea is like, all right, well, I want to feel what I'm supposed to be feeling or use what I'm supposed to be using in my squat now that I have this, you know, new range of motion. But it doesn't sound like something you would do before a heavy squat session. Is that like something you agree with? Like a sentiment you agree with? Like, I'm going to go foam roll my legs and then like, you know, do a 5x3 squat.
Not unless they try to use that range beforehand. You know, if they locked that in with like a set of like not so heavy box squats and really focused on like what that IT was like foam rolling that IT solves, then that would be a pretty decent idea. But you would still have to warm up those hips in some way. But that's where I think people just don't understand that. And that's where I think having like a coach or like someone in the space who knows what they're talking about guide you through that, because not everybody's going to know like, yeah, dude, I'm going to fucking foam roll my glute medius so my knees can come out a little further in my squat. Who the fuck knows that out of the general pop? You know, you need somebody to teach you that first.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're never going to know. And that's why having someone in the space like a coach is so valuable, because they can teach you these things so you can go into the gym and be like, all right, dude, I got to foam roll my glute medius, but then I got to freaking warm it up so I can kill my squat. And then that's going to really, really improve your squat, not only at that moment, but probably for the rest of your life too.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I feel like it's definitely something more people need to hop on.
I did want to add on to something that I was...
Yeah, go right ahead.
Sorry, Randy. And we're at like, I feel like we're at like 4 seconds, like something in between like each other. So I always have to like stop and wait for you.
Yeah.
But, I think I want to touch up on something about the warming up for exercise. Something that's like been an absolute game changer. And this is like gold info. One thing that's been an absolute game changer for me and my clients has been intro workout resets. Because if you take that same principle and like you apply it to anybody who warms up pre-workout, who doesn't warm up correctly and they only foam roll, you lose those results within 10, 15 minutes. By the time you're halfway through your workout and you go to do, and let's say you foam roll your chest or your shoulders, you're about to go hit chest. You know, you're in the same spot pretty much as you walked in the gym with your chest. You know what I mean? Maybe a little bit less because you warmed up a little bit. But ever since I took my CPPS certification, like it's been a staple. And I basically just go in and I cool down what I just worked on. Let's say it's full body. I'll hit I'll hit lower body in the first half of the workout, and I'll hit a intra workout reset to lock all of that in. Then I will hit another stretch to reintroduce the movements. Let's say it's like swimmers, like a shoulder movement to warm me up for an overhead press, something like that. Or like re-hitting my chest with a foam roller or my lats with a foam roller before I do anything overhead, just to get that little bit of extra range. It's just introducing that one more time so you can go in confident into your lift. And that's been a game changer for me and my students.
So is that something like, so I used to do like when I like in between sets of like benching or doing like a dumbbell press or something, I would go and get like a really light band and do like banded pull aparts or a banded row or something like in between sets so that I can kind of get that,
Yes.
keep it just like, because one, you get the stretch from the press, but then also when you actually do the pull apart, and you feel your mid back light up, then you go over to actually do a press again. You're like, I know exactly what this feels like because it's already lit up. So something along those lines.
I would even take that a step further and be like, start off with the shoulder cars and then follow it up with a band pull apart. Do a mobility movement or a SMR movement or something to get you ready for whatever you're supposed to do, and then lock that in with something like a band pull apart. So if you're doing swimmers or shoulder dislocates or shoulder cars, and you lock that in with a band pull apart, you're now getting all of that new range in your band pull apart. So now when you go into your bench press, you have that little bit of extra back here that you can access and you can use to your full advantage as leverage.
So it's almost like some of it is like, releasing the tight muscle, but then also going a step further and like activating the antagonistic muscle. So you kind of get both sides of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
I like that a lot, actually. I feel like when people are doing this and they start challenging these new ranges of motion, they probably have to be cautious with, the weight that they're probably used to using, right?
Yeah. Like whenever you're going into a new range of motion, I feel as though you should absolutely gradually work your way into it. You should never throw yourself into a new range of motion. That's like asking for an injury. Imagine you took a cold rubber band and you just like went like that. You know what I mean? That thing would snap.
Yeah.
Probably hit somebody in the eye over there too. It would snap hard.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying a muscle is the same, but it's the same concept. You could hurt yourself if your body's not using that range of motion. Let's say you're not fucking good at shoulder internal rotation, and then you do something like a clean. That's gonna suck on your shoulder. Like that
Right.
huge row up there, that's gonna make your shoulder feel like horrible.
It's
So that's
almost like,
not something that I would recommend doing.
it's almost like if you were in a shoulder sleeper, stretch position, and you just took you took your arm and you just jammed it down real fast. Like that's kind of what the weight's doing in a movement like that.
Exactly.
And like you could absolutely tear something.
Exactly. So if you take the shoulder sleeper and you're thinking of a Pales rails and you freaking yank your arm down there, you know exactly what that feels like. And imagine that like times a million with a loaded bar. That would suck. And so that's why something like Pales rails is so beneficial when you train in that range of motion. So now you're getting not only the regressive side of it, but the progressive side too. So you can get this whole entire range and then use both sides of that. And that's why it's so important. And the carryover is huge when it goes over into strength training because the principles are the same. You're still using strength training principles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was actually curious, just for those that don't know what Pales rails are, and I know that's such like a fundamental part of mobility training. Do you want to walk someone through like what that even means and whatnot?
So Pales rails is it's an acronym. It stands for progressive and regressive angular isometric loading. All right. So basically, all it is you're taking your joint into its most end range of motion. Let's take the shoulder, for example. If you go into maximal internal rotation, that is your passive range of motion. Progressively would be trying to extend that range of motion, right? Or progressive would be trying to go back here. So you'd be pressing into that shoulder joint, and then regressive is trying to get more out of that stretch. And that's all it is. It's a strength training principle that introduces isometrics to the very end ranges of your range of motion. So you can increase it, basically.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it does. And I think that explanation's good because I think especially if someone's hearing about mobility for the first time, they're probably going to be curious, like, what even is it? And I feel like that's been like everything that you prescribe for me is a version of like a Pales Rails so far anyway, I think, right?
Right. So FRC is a new concept, right? Within like the last 5 years, I think they've been actually like blowing off, right? So Pales Rails is not like a huge industry known name yet. It's a fairly new concept, but that's why I think it's so exciting. That's why I really like it. And, the benefits that it has are huge, and the principles behind it are unique, but they make a lot of sense. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So Pales and Rails, they're good for like rehab. They're good for strength training. They're good for prehab, mitigating injury, recovering from the injury. It all depends on the intensity that you put onto it. And the most basic way to put it, I'd say, is you're training for the inevitable. You're training for the part that, you're going hiking one day and a rock's going to slip from under you and your knee is going to go out to the side and your hip's going to go one way. You're preparing for that. You're strengthening the body to withstand that so you don't get injured. Or if you're an athlete, if you're, jumping or exploding to the side laterally, and then you have to go explode off the other foot. When your foot goes into like maximal external rotation and your knee super rotates, so you avoid like a meniscus tear or something. It's simple concepts that prepare you for anything. And that's why I say it's making your body almost bulletproof. It's the simplest concepts that make the stretching itself a whole different concept. And it's very cool.
Yeah, I like a lot of people, I feel like if you put them in an end range of motion, like exaggerated end range of motion, like can't even flex a muscle like as it's stretched. And so you have to think like if you were to slip and fall, like, well, if you can't consciously do it yourself, all right, your body's not going to do it automatically. And if you don't flex your muscle, then immediately whatever joint or insertion point that muscle is attached to is getting loaded as opposed to the muscle itself. So like when you're sitting there and you're doing an isometric exercise at an end range of motion, and now like you're like, okay, I can actually flex my muscle down here. If you were to fall, like your body can do it itself, right? So like I feel like it's very important that people, because it does seem kind of weird. You're like, well, I can flex my like pec or whatever, but you like, isn't it all the same? But like, it's really not, right? And you're like you said, you're preparing for those extreme situations where you get a hyperextension or you're a little overstretched, and if you can't do it yourself mentally, then it's not going to automatically happen, right? Like like a muscle contraction like that. So I don't know, and it's crazy how noticeable the difference is before and after when you do a Pales Rails and then you go into a stretch you did at the beginning. And you're like, well, I just gained like an extra 20 degrees of ROM here, and it felt good too.
Yeah, it's actually really drastic.
Right.
It's funny how drastic it is. I think one of them where it really stuck out to me was the shoulder sleeper today. Like right before this, we were going through my mobility routine, and like it's incredible how much you can actually see a difference immediately with your range of motion.
Right. And I'll touch up on that a little bit just to bring it up again. But when you go into Pales and Rails, the whole concept behind it is the intensity, the force you put into it. So force is the language of cells. You cannot make a change on a cell without introducing some type of force. Okay. So that progressive force, that pushing into that end range of motion that you have, is basically just reminding your body like, hey, by the way, I can still use this. Even though I'm in my end range, I can still control this. So that 15, 20 degrees that you get is basically your body just being like, oh, well, okay, here you go. I didn't know that. So like, just take it.
Yeah.
When you go into your rails, you go into that new range of motion, you can reintroduce that Pales and do that over and over and over again. So inevitably, Randy and I just did 2 rounds. We went from like here all the way down to here. And it was crazy. But that's because he convinced his body that, hey, by the way, I can still use this. He earned his body's trust to train in those ranges of motion, and that's important. There's such a big difference between moving passively and moving actively. I was using this example with somebody that I talk to a lot on Instagram. Her name's Alex, and she's a trainer over in Ohio, I think. And she trains athletes. And we were having this discussion the other day, and I was like, okay, think of this, right? I like to use hiking as an example a lot because I do it a lot. But if you're hiking and it's raining, right, and you slip, there's rocks on one side and there's a cliff on the other side. I do not think that you're going to like freeze time and be like, hold up, I'm going to contract my fucking quad right now because I think that this is going to like really help impact my fall. No, you're going to eat shit on the mountain and you're going to hurt. It's going to hurt. Yeah. Your body always takes the easiest way out.
Yeah, it doesn't really know.
And like, it's because it's so efficient. Your body is incredibly, incredibly efficient. It's an adaptable machine. So whatever the easiest way out, the most efficient and effective way it can take, it will take it. It doesn't take in consideration like what's being used. It's just trying to move the knee in a way where it doesn't shatter in a way, right? Comparatively, if you knew how to use that range of motion, it's in your body's subconscious. You could probably your body would do what's necessary. And if that's the easiest muscle to get to make sure you're safe, then you're just that much safer. You're never going to completely eradicate the chance of injury because you're always going to fall in some fucking way, but it mitigates it. It protects.
If you want your default pattern to be one that's favorable for, your joints, right? Like this is how I'm supposed to move. And I've done it so many times that, practice makes better, right? So it ends up being your default pattern. And then, but actually I wanted to ask so what kind of, or I guess how important is like when you're doing these kind of things like pills, rails, or just even stretching in general, just like breathing, because it's something I kind of focus on. Because it's painful, also helps you calm down. But how important is like the breathing when you're doing something like this, like how you breathe, I guess.
Super important. Hold on, I gotta breathe. Super important. I can get into a whole fucking podcast about breathing, but we don't have that kind of time. It's like I think along with strength training, it's the same. Breathing is essential. If you think about bracing the core, right? It's the same principles. If you don't take that huge breath to push out the abdominal walls, you're gonna have a hard time. Pushing up like 300-400 pounds, like compared to if you did not control your breathing at all. You would have a little bit less power. For me, I found that when I control my breathing, I'm able to focus on the situation at hand. Sometimes when people do mobility, they're very like on their phone. I was just telling Randy when I do a 90-90, I sit on my phone and drink coffee, so ignore that. But people, when they do mobility, they're like super like not there. They're like, yeah, whatever. I'm just fucking stretching and putting my body in these weird shapes. But controlling your breathing and really focusing on that puts you in the moment and allows you to really pinpoint those muscle groups that are a little harder to get to. So like if you're really trying to isolate the hip for external rotation when you're in a 90-90, that's hard to do without thinking of like everything else that you got to do. So breathing, I think, helps create tension, a consistent tension too, and puts you more in the stretch, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And like the idea is like too, you're stretching. So like you're trying to make your CNS relax. So if you're like panting or like freaking out or whatever and like breathing heavily and like you're in pain, like it's not going to relax. Like the idea is like, hey, chill out,
Right.
Yeah. You're trying to convince your own self through just like relaxed breathing that this is okay.
Yeah.
Like it's like I remember I was showing my dad the 90-90 and he just getting into the stretch was very difficult for him and he started to cramp up. And when he cramped up, he freaked out. Ooh. And he's like, nope, I can't do this. Sorry, not happening.
And they jump right out of it.
Yeah, actually. So I guess that's a good.
And like, Go ahead, Adam.
Okay, well, I was gonna say like if
No,
you're
go ahead.
like if somebody is trying to do one of these movements and they begin to cramp, like what is your advice towards them? Like fight through it or just bail?
Oh, dude, fight through the cramp. I know it sucks, man, but fight through the cramp. I was like when I was going through one of Randy's things today, I got a big cramp and I had to fight right through it. And it's because your body I think it's just confusion of the body, right? Your body, when you're going into that cramp is a muscle that your body just does not know what to do with yet. So when you fight through that cramp, your body kind of understands like, okay, I got to do something about this one because this one is cramping up hard. What do I do? And eventually it gets the hint. It will start to use it. So fight through the cramp. It sucks, but really just try to increase that stretch because it's just muscle confusion at that point. You got to introduce the stretch to the body. Not all of the muscles are going to want to conform to what you're doing. You have to kind of, in a way, force it, but on your own, safely.
So like, I'm going to shift focus slightly here, but so like, people that are, you ask them like, all right, what do you do for a warm up? And they're like, yeah, I run. Like I go for, I run for 20 minutes or
Great
like
question. I was going to ask this
like
one
that.
too.
Like warms me up or something. What do you say to something like that? Somebody who does like, I'm not talking like, well, I guess you could say maybe intense cardio, right? Like 30 or 40 minutes of maybe not intense, just like lisp, like they're going for a jog, or like or versus like somebody who, does a mobility routine. Like, oh yeah, is it just okay? I'm just going to go for a run. It's fine.
I would ask them what they're training for, what their goal is. If they're training for a half marathon or a marathon, maybe that's a appropriate warm up. If they're training for, powerlifting, I don't know if that's the right warm up for that. I don't think if like a fucking sprint is going to warm you up for a 700-pound deadlift. So that's where I would shift the question. If they're training for like a marathon or a triathlon where they got to run and shit and keep that cardio up, I would be like, sure, keep it up. Great job. But if you're training for weight training and you're just warming up by running to get the heart rate up, and that's what you think is okay, and that's what you think is right to weight train, I'd say there's better options. At least they're warming up, but they could be spending that time a little bit more wisely, taking their body through like specific ranges of motion. That's what I personally like to do the most. If I know that I personally like to work out full body. So if I know that I don't have a lot of time that day for a full warm up, all I'll do is like some body weight exercises of the patterns that I'm going to be doing. So if I'm doing squats, I'll do some body weight squats and really make sure that my form looks awesome. If I'm doing some pulling for that day, I'll do some, grab some TRX straps, do some pulling, or grab a band and do some band pull aparts or something like that. But taking your body through a full intentional range of motion and like your best range of motion under body weight, I would say is a pretty good warm up if you're short on time. I always think that some mobility pre-workout is a game changer. It'll literally change your life, change your lifts, everything about it.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more with that. I mean, literally has directly impacted me on a day-to-day basis, which is like why I was like so adamant about doing this episode, because I've just like, it's literally changed my whole life. Like I don't have to like do these crazy stretches to get my back to loosen up because I'm putting the work in, for almost 30 minutes before my actual workout. Yeah. I'm spending doing these mobility routines. Right. And it's like, at first you're like, is this really going to help? And then all of a sudden your shoulder stops hurting and your hip stops hurting and you don't have low back pain. And, all of a sudden your lifts start looking better and like you literally feel better. So it's just like such an important thing that I think has just been overlooked.
What about, I was going to say, what about like, like post-workout? If you want to do something post-workout, like what is something you'd recommend? So like I've in the past stretched post-workout because, I like stretching like period, but like, before I left, I'm thinking more so mobility stuff because I need to feel the muscles, etc., be like in the right positions and everything. But afterwards, like, what's something you would recommend, like post workout for a routine if you do, for your clients or somebody?
Um, Personally, I like to lock it in with some cars. And cars are just controlled articular rotations that take my joint through the fullest range of motion. And I look at it as like keeping them greasy, making sure that they move good. Like after a workout, some people will leave and they feel like tight and stuff. I want to be able to still move in that range with the strength gains that I just made through the gym, So after a hard workout, I won't do like pails and rails or anything like that, but I'll do some cars. I'll go for a little bit of a walk. I think cooling down is important. So like if you like drop the fucking bar of a deadlift and just walk right outside to your car, maybe not the best idea. You could definitely spend some time to like get the heart rate down, get the blood cooling a little bit. I mean, the blood doesn't physically cool, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
But taking some time to just cool down a little bit after your workout makes a difference. Taking a shower even. But if you're doing mobility, I'd say like look into just cars. Doing a full range of motion, taking your joints to as big a circle and trying to keep those joints as greasy as possible. You want to like just grease the groove every single day. And that's really what's important. If you come out of a squat and your hips fucking hurt, what's the point?
Yeah.
You got to make sure that you feel comfortable in that squat too. Yeah. So make sure that you can use them.
So like, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So in terms of mobility, obviously you can do mobility just by yourself. You don't need anything special for it. But in terms of like tools you can use to kind of help yourself if you're running a mobility routine, what's like your your favorite tool to use to assist with mobility routines?
A personal trainer. That's number one. Because if you don't have one, if you don't have good programming behind it, like no tool in the world is going to help you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the right programming. You have to have the right intent. You have to have guidance with it. Going into it blind has never gotten anybody anywhere. It doesn't matter if you have these fucking sticks behind me. If you don't have good programming behind them, they're just a stick. Yeah. You spent $170 on some sticks. That's what you did. So number one, programming. Number two, I think like yoga blocks are a great tool to have. Some tennis balls are a great tool to have. Like a normal strap is a great tool to have. A stick is a good, like really anything that you have lying around your house you can use. Instead of a strap, you can use a belt. Instead of one of these, you can use a broomstick. You can use, instead of a tennis ball, you could use a tennis ball. Like those are pretty hard to, easy to come by, but you can really use anything. But yeah, dude, like it's without proper programming, without a plan, none of those tools mean anything. That's where a trainer or having guidance is invaluable. It's an investment that you make for education. It's an education experience, or it should be. If a trainer just gives you a fucking plan and is like, all right, have fun, find a new trainer.
Yeah. And it's kind of tough too, because like if you don't, I mean, it's nice having somebody like a personal trainer, because if you don't, like you end up getting like, it just takes 10 times longer. Like I spent like so much time just literally trial and error. You're like, all right, I heard this helps for shoulder mobility or shoulder problems, so I'm going to do this. You do it for like 6 months and you're like, well, my shoulder still kind of hurts. Let me try this, and then like 5 years later, you're like, you talk to some guy and they're like, yeah, try this, or like I was doing a shoulder mobility routine and I had kind of outgrown it and didn't really realize. And then you showed me a progression and I was like, oh, cool. Like, now I can continue my mobility improvements instead of kind of stagnating, because I'm not like, it's right. Like progressive overload, right? You help me progress the movement. So it's just like little things like that, where if you're trying to fix a problem and you don't want it to take like 5 to 10 years, and instead you want somebody who's like, well, I know for a fact, like based on XYZ, try this, and that. And it'll greatly speed up your progress in things like that.
Yeah,
I
I
feel like a
think
lot of people don't understand.
yeah, because I like
Right.
and like that's exactly how it was for me too. Is like I would be doing things that I thought were addressing the problems I had, but it turns out I was actually doing things that like weren't. They were like doing things that kind of made it better, but they weren't the most efficient way to solve the problems I had.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that until Andy showed me a bunch of movements, and all of a sudden my life changed. And it's like, had I just like, of course you didn't have all this information for the years that I was messing up. And now you're, obviously smarter and more qualified and whatnot. And it feels awesome to be able to go to someone who has these qualifications and can be like, okay, if you want to improve whatever it is that you're having problems with, do this, this, and that. And it comes back to that like cake recipe thing, which I love to make the analogy for. But it's like, if you're trying to make the best cake, you don't just grab a bunch of random ingredients. You look up a recipe, or you go somewhere, or you look in a book that has a predetermined recipe. And that book, in this case, is like a resource like yourself.
Right. And, and that like bringing it to like back to food analogies, I guess, because I do love those. Having a personal trainer is like going out to eat. You're not paying for just the food, because anybody can go and make a fucking steak at home for like less than $20, but people pay at $60-$70 at a restaurant for some. What you pay for is the experience behind the line. What you pay for is the years of education and time that the person doing this put into their craft. And like that is really what you pay for when you get a personal trainer. And that's why I think of it as an investment, because you're not just paying some dude to fucking count while you do reps. You're paying for somebody to point you in the right direction. You're paying for somebody's experience. Like I can't tell you how many times I wish back in the day when I was going through my own weight loss journey and I didn't have a trainer, how many mistakes I made throughout, the years. And when I got a trainer, dude, like some of the questions that I had that I've been spending years trying to answer were answered within minutes. It saves you months, if not years of your life of trial and error. And having somebody to just bounce ideas off of is just, it's something else, So,
yeah.
That's what it's all about, man. And that's why I think that you should spend time and energy and money looking for a good qualified coach, because not every coach is good and qualified and will point you in the right direction for you.
Right.
They might do it for some people. Some people are okay with not having any extra help. Some people are okay with just getting a piece of paper with some movements on it and being told to just eat chicken and rice for 5 days. But some people are not okay with that. And you're going to be pissed off and hate trainers forever if you get a trainer who you don't like because of the way they're coaching. Just because you got a bad trainer once doesn't mean that all trainers are going to be that way. And that's another thing why I think now more than ever, I think there's more opportunity to find good trainers, because people are now branching off more online. Mm-hmm. Better trainers are more accessible to more people because of the online thing. And people are starting to realize that after COVID and everything. I think people are starting to understand that their health is important, and, you got to invest the time, energy, and money into something like that to keep it going.
Yeah, and I feel like it has become very obvious to a lot of people who used to go or who were on their feet a lot for work and have now gained 30, 40 pounds in quarantine. And, they're like, holy crap, I didn't realize what the amount of activity I was doing, and I don't know how to fix it because I'm not into lifting, but now I have all this time on my hands. And so blah, 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 online trainers, right? I feel like it's exploding for those reasons. It's becoming very obvious that people are starting to very obviously notice the lack of movement and the lack of whatever just being outside and leaving your house kind of does to you. And so it's almost like a silver lining wake up call in a way, in that a lot of people are going to be probably a lot healthier afterwards just because they're more conscious of what's going on. But also, personal training as a business is as shitty as it is, that if you start now, it is almost guaranteed to be an online trainer thing, right? As opposed to in person, where you'd imagine it would be better for somebody to start as an in-person trainer just to get the reps in and whatever. It's a good time because, supply and demand, right? Like there's such a high supply or demand for it. And, you become a trainer, you bump up the supply a little, you're going to have clients if you know what you're talking about. But I guess I was going to say like, maybe we'll close it off with, like you said, good trainer versus bad trainer. Like, I guess what in your mind is like I don't want to say red flag, or how would somebody like identify good versus bad trainer? Because a lot of people just sling bullshit, right? So it's really easy for somebody to be confused looking for a trainer.
If they got anything to do with fit teas, look the other way and run. Anything to do with fit teas. That's even if it's like, even if they're drinking it one day, get it out of there.
Even if they spit in the general direction anyway. Of a fit tea.
Bad red flag. Well, that's definitely a red flag. Fit teas are a red flag. But other than that,
eat this way according to your body type. You want an 8-pack? I got you.
Dude, yeah. If they're anything like fucking V-Shred,
yeah,
go the other way. Yo.
Do you have a 6-pack and want an 8-pack? I got
you.
Guy. Yeah, I mean, basically, if they're like all over your fucking feed, like being like, yo, like only 5 spots left, like all the fucking time, like, and it's all marketing, and it's all of their posts are about like getting onto their class or getting like subscribing to their channel or whatever. That's a red flag. I understand that you got to like market yourself a little bit, but there's like a trainer who's there with the purpose of educating, and then there's a trainer who's there with the purpose of taking your money. Like, even though I love personal training, right? It bothers me that people use people's like insecurities as a sales tactic. And those are the trainers that you need to watch out for. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, because I feel like it's pretty obvious. I mean, maybe not to somebody while it's happening, but if you take a step back, you can kind of just it's pretty plain. Like, okay, this guy is capitalizing on somebody. It's like fear mongering in a way. Like, okay, this guy's clearly trying to capitalize on somebody's insecurity instead of health. Yeah,
right. If they post like an Instagram ad and they're like, sorry. If they post an Instagram ad and they fucking pull up in a Lamborghini and they're like, yo, what's up, bitch? Heard you're fat. What's up? You want some training? Like,
I'll give you 3 foods to avoid and 3 foods to eat to boost your testosterone through the roof.
Oh, God.
How would you like to lose 50 pounds in 5 days?
Yeah.
Basically,
dude, I see.
Run away.
I like even in some magazines, like I saw a magazine the other day, and like I'll try to like close it out with this, but it was like lose like 16 pounds in a week on like a soup diet, like eat more soup and lose 16 pounds. I was like,
the best diets are all in soup.
What do you mean eat soup? Like, what is this? 16 pounds in a week? Like, go to the hospital if that happens. Go to the hospital if that happens. Nobody's losing 16 pounds in a week unless you're literally not eating food, or you're losing water weight for like a fight or something.
Dude, they're just eating soup.
Yeah, the all soup diet.
Right. And man, it's bullshit, because like the fitness industry has been like that for a while. It's been like, fucking, you should be afraid of carbs because of this, or you should drink casein protein because of this, or you should go keto or intermittent fast because of this. But really, you got to find what works for you. But that's hard to do if you don't have the guidance behind it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So have a good personal trainer, someone with testimonials, someone who puts work and energy into providing good quality content for their viewers and listeners and for their clients, someone who's not just like looking to fill up a client list. You know what I mean? It's like, I understand that you got to get paid. We all got to get paid, but like, it's about serving instead of taking. Really, if your coach is less about themselves and more about your results, that is a good coach, I would say.
And so the awesome part is, luckily, if you've been listening, you actually have access to a great personal trainer right now. So why don't you throw out your sort of like where people can find you on Instagram or wherever it is, and then we'll close out after that.
Yeah.
Sweet. Paradigmperformance.com. Paradigmperformancept.com. My Instagram is Drew Caudill P2. Caudill is Caudi with 2 L's. Facebook is Paradigm Performance Personal Training, and my Instagram is my Twitter is Coach Drew Caudill. I'm pretty much everywhere nowadays.
All right,
Parlor.
All right, awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on, and yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for listening.
Yeah,
dude. Thanks for having me. See you guys later.
Thank you for listening to Bone Apple Tea. We release new episodes every Monday, alternating between topic-based episodes, current events, and interviews. Make sure you subscribe so you don't have to do anything to get the latest episodes. Also, follow us on Instagram at BoneAppleTV. That's BoneAppleTeav on Instagram. Thanks for listening.